Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Sage 300 CRE Equipment Cost Setup and Workflow presentation. My name is Jeanette, and I'll be your presenter this morning. Just a quick reminder that there were four attachments with the GoToMeeting invitation that you received. One is the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to look at first this morning, and then there are three Word documents, an introduction, a setup, and a workflow document that we're going to follow as we go through the application together. Okay, so here we go, equipment cost. So for today, we're going to talk first about some features with the equipment cost module. Then we'll take a look at some terminology that we'll be using as we go through the application. We're going to jump into the software at that point and go through the setup. I want to go through the settings with you, take a look at equipment types, cost codes, standard codes for equipment, the equipment setup itself, rate tables, additionally account tables if you need to activate those for your interface with General Ledger, and then we'll take a quick look at the workflow. Just as an FYI, most of the information that will be entered to equipment is probably going to come from outside of the equipment module itself. So our workflow section is going to be, not as intense as the setup. That's because accounts payable and payroll is going to be providing the majority of those transactions. All right, so if you take a look at the intro Word document, we're going to talk for just a few minutes about the features that come with the equipment module. You will have purchased equipment if you own your own equipment that you're going to be using on the projects that you do for your company. This application is what you're going to use to track all the costs incurred of owning that piece of equipment, and then track all the revenue that that piece of equipment earns. Because as you use this equipment on a project, you're going to charge the job a cost for the use of that piece of equipment, and that's going to be revenue earned for that piece of equipment. This is going to help you determine if this equipment is profitable. Now, again, this is an application you're going to use for your own equipment that you own, and typically it's for the larger pieces of equipment. Equipment cost is not meant as a small tool tracking application. It's meant to track things like pavers and dump trucks, and cars and pickups can be included in that as well. We can also set up and track miscellaneous quantities, so something that is outside of cost or revenue that you need to track for reporting purposes. So these could be things like meter readings or trips or PUC mileage, even downtime hours. There's, anything, again, that you need to track that doesn't fit into that cost or revenue category. And then again, this is going to determine how profitable that piece of equipment is to your company. So by the use of reports and inquiries, we're going to be able to get that information. The data entry, of course, is just like the other applications. It's pretty much a kind of a spreadsheet style entry. We store totals on the piece of equipment, life to date, year to date, month to date, next month, last month. We even have an additional user-defined period. This is kind of like job cost. The one difference between equipment and cost and job cost is that we can go 1 month into the future in equipment where you can't with job cost. However, if you turn on that additional user-defined period, you'll have to keep current. So whether it's weekly or bi-weekly, you'll have to close those periods as you go before you can post. Terminology. Most of this should be, kind of self-explanatory. So any type of equipment that you own, I'll be using the word equipment for that. We're going to be setting up equipment types and equipment IDs. And then cost, what is it costing you to keep that equipment in working order? Tires, tune-ups, glass replacement, anything that you want to track on that piece of equipment that you think is a major cost to keeping that equipment in working order. We are going to set up cost codes, so how you break that cost down so that we can track it in reports. Parts, labor, depreciation are the examples I have on the screen. Some people break it down to even farther. They might break the parts down and even, maybe parts of the engine for the tune-up, oil, spark plugs, tires, that kind of thing. And then revenue is what your piece of equipment is earning for you. So how much is it making when you use it on one of your jobs? We will be looking at how to set up revenue codes. So you need to decide how you want to charge for the use of that piece of equipment. Whether you are renting it out to the project hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. We have several examples that we can, take a look at. Okay, workflow-wise, there are really three places that the information or the transactions for your equipment are going to get into the system. And that will either be from an accounts payable invoice, and once it's posted, if it's been coded to a piece of equipment, it will send information over. Whether it's a piece of equipment that was either worked on in the shop or used on a job, that may be entered through payroll. So you can record equipment IDs and cost codes or revenue codes through the Enter Time or Enter Check program in payroll, or you're entering that information directly in equipment cost. Once that information is entered in your intro document, the data files that equipment uses, of course, everything is going to go into a new.eqt, which is the unposted, and then it will go to the current once you do post, and then history if you move that information from current to history. There is one other important file to remember, and that's the standard.eqs file. This is where some of the tables are set up. So rate tables, account tables, some of the miscellaneous entry information is also stored there as well. So pretty much the same basic files that you see in the other modules, a master file, 3 transaction file, and then this additional standard file. There's one other way I've got on the chart that's on your screen, and that's the import. We can import information into equipment, cost or revenue, so you can import into the new.eqt file and then post. And then lastly, each month you'll run reports, and then you'll close your month. So equipment is basically like job cost in the fact that it only has a close month program, no close year. You just keep closing the month continually. All right, we're going to jump into the software now. And we're going to talk about setup. So if you want to switch over to the equipment setup document, Word document, we're going to be going through quite a few pieces here. We're going to take a look at custom descriptions on setting up the sections for the equipment ID, the costs, and the revenue codes. We're going to then go through equipment settings, some of the optional types that we can set up, equipment types, standard cost codes, revenue codes, miscellaneous codes. We'll get into the equipment setup itself, and then some of the optional tables that we can use. So the first thing I wanted to take a look at with you is under File, Company Settings, Custom Descriptions. We have a few items here that should have been defined. If you already have equipment cost up and running, these things would have been defined when the application was initially set up. So we have the equipment itself. It has a setup section option. This is kind of like setting up the job number. So if you take a look at page 3, you'll see in our sample data we've set up 2 sections for the piece of equipment: the type with a width of 2, and then we've named the second section piece with a width of 4. We can also section the cost codes and the revenue code. So if we take a look at the cost code field, here we've set it up as system and part. We've actually, we're defining how we want to group these costs together on a report. And so that's the basic decision that you're making here with all of the sectioning in these 3 areas: the equipment itself, the cost code sections, and the revenue code sections. You need to have an idea of how you want to be able to sort and run reports. And that's basically the whole idea behind the sectioning in job cost as well. Now, keep in mind that this is an irreversible decision. That's at the bottom of page 3. So once you set this and you go into the settings and you actually create the master file and then actually start setting up pieces of equipment, you cannot go back and change the sectioning. You would have to actually delete the EQ master file and start over again. All right, on page 4 of your setup, we have the EQ settings. So if you go into File, Company Settings, EQ Settings, this is the step that actually creates the master file and the standard file. So if you're brand new to the system, you'll get the prompt that those files do not exist. Go ahead and just click OK to create them. On this first screen, starting on the left-hand side, if you have prefixes in your company, it's going to ask for a default prefix, which it will use if you do not mark this retrieve prefix from equipment, or if the piece of equipment does not have a GL prefix assigned to it. So it has to have a place to come into to grab a prefix to create the GL account number. You can also check the box to retrieve the prefix from the piece of equipment. Just make sure that all of those pieces of equipment have the prefix on them. The period size, this is the extra additional period you can store on the piece of equipment. Usually this matches up to payroll, and it might also match up to the additional period you may have set up in job cost. We've set the sample company here to not use it. Month ending, it's going to grab this off of the prefix when you initially set up. But this is going to change as you close your month from month to month. This date will change. All right, the historical totals, if you are wanting to store historical totals in the history.eqh file, again for reporting purposes, you can check these boxes. In this case, on the sample data, we're going to store cost for the month and the year. We're going to hold those transactions in the historical totals file. Again, this is for reporting purposes. Right, the buttons on the right-hand side, Post and Interface Settings. You want to go ahead and mark how you want to handle entries created directly in equipment. When you finish entering, do you want those to automatically post, or if you set it to manual, it'll prompt you to post. I would recommend that you set all of the posting to the interfacing applications to automatic. If you're posting in equipment, there really shouldn't be any reason why you don't automatically post over to billing and general ledger and job cost if you have those applications. And for those of you that have been on the system for a while, if you are continually having to go in and post in GL and job cost, you might want to check this field to make, or this screen to make sure that those are set to automatic, and that might save you some steps in your workflow. The posting settings button, this first checkbox, accumulate revenue units to equipment, you might want to check that because you may want to record or store hours. These would be the hours or the days based on the revenue type that you're posting. The post journals, entries journal, all this is controlling is what kind of information shows up after the journal prints. So do you want to see equipment detail, meaning it's going to show you summary totals for each piece of equipment that was entered, or cost detail, or revenue detail, or miscellaneous entry detail? Okay, so it gives you more of a breakdown than just one line of grand totals at the end of the journal. This can be kind of helpful if you're looking for those types of summaries. Right, entry settings. This first checkbox kind of goes with the rate table search order here. So this allow override of rate kind of goes together with this field over here on the right-hand side. This is a little different than payroll. For those of you that use payroll and use the rate table, you know that the system will automatically retrieve the highest rate that it finds, regardless, whether it's on the rate table or on the employee master file. In equipment, you have a choice. You can leave it at the highest rate or change it to the lowest rate, or tell it to display the rates as you do the data entry so that you can pick the one that you want to use. This checkbox says I can change that rate when I'm doing my data entry. If you uncheck this, then whatever rate is pulled based on this search order, that's the rate that's going to come in, and you will not be able to change it. You also have an override here of the calculated amount. So if you want to be able to override, the units times the rate amount, you need to check this box. Uncheck it if you do not want the operator to be able to override that amount. The default revenue code, it will use this code if there is not one set up on the piece of equipment. Same with the default category. This is for job cost. So if there is not a category set up on the piece of equipment, it will come here. The cost code journals, the revenue journals, these are set up in General Ledger. They're for an audit trail to be able to track that piece of equipment, or excuse me, to be able to track that transaction in General Ledger to see where it actually came from. If you don't have journals set up in GL, I would recommend that you think about creating those and then come back into each of your applications. In settings, each application will have a place for you to enter those journal numbers. It's a real good audit trail. The intercompany, if you have multiple prefixes, multiple companies or divisions where one company or division is handling the revenue for another company, you'll need intercompany payable and receivable accounts. The accounting date will default to use the entered accounting date. So this will give you a column within equipment in the data entry screens, or you can use the transaction date as the accounting date. Most people will actually enter the accounting date themselves. The update location will default to last entry, and what this means is we can add a field to the entry grid where you can enter a location for that piece of equipment that will update the equipment record, and then you can use that in reports to track where this piece of equipment is located. It defaults to last entry. You can change it to never update if that is your preference. Okay, the GL entry settings. These are for the accounts to be retrieved when you're doing your data entry. So we have a default revenue credit account and debit account. So the left-hand side, those two boxes are for the revenue entries. The right-hand side is for the cost entries, and this is for entries that are made either in directly in equipment, or if they're made even in payroll, if you're doing revenue entries, or if you're doing cost type entries over in accounts payable or in payroll. Now, if you are using, let's talk about the debit accounts down here at the bottom. There are 4 fields here. The top 3 are the same in all 4 areas. 1, use account table. So if you have a situation where not everything needs to go to the account that you enter here as your default, you want to be able to set up an account table and have it based on 1 or all 3, 1, 2, or all 3 of these fields, either the equipment type, the piece of equipment, or the revenue code itself. You can turn on this use account table, select the columns that you want in that table, and then you'll be able to set up a revenue debit table for this. And it's the same with the cost accounts. You can use 1, 2, or all 3 of these fields. Now, that will be overridden if you look here at the bottom field where it says use JC cost account. So if this transaction is job related, it's going to ignore whatever you have set up here, and it's going to go to job cost to get its account number for the debit side of the entry. The credit side up here at the top, again, you can use account table. Change this here. And again, for the credit side, you can define where it's supposed to, or how you're going to set that table up for both the revenue and the cost account. Now, by activating this table, let me just show you something really quick here. I'm going to take this off. We'll okay this for a second. If you look under Setup, you'll notice that the only table that we have here available to us are rate tables. If I come back in under Settings, and if I activate the Use Account table, and I may just activate them here, you'll see that my Setup drop-down changes. It adds the account tables here. So if you're looking at your Setup drop-down and you do not see account tables at the bottom, it's because they were not turned on over in Settings. Right. I'm going to leave these turned on because we're going to look at those table setups here in just a bit. Right. So the 3 fields then that are the same in each of these 4 areas are Use Account Table, Allow Override. If you do not want the account number to be overridden during data entry, you need to uncheck this box. If you want the entries that are created to General Ledger to be summarized, you need to check this box. So these 3 fields are the same in every area. Only the debit account areas at the bottom have the Use JC Cost Account option. And by default, they are checked. So if you do not want it to go back to job cost To get the account numbers, you need to uncheck those boxes. And in your documentation on pages 9 through the top part of 11, I've described each one of those checkboxes for you. The last button in settings is the journals. So these are the default reports that Sage has sent out for each of these areas of entry or processing. So if you have a custom report that you want to use in place of the default from Sage, you need to come in here to the Journal Options button and use the Browse button and put your custom report in here. Otherwise, as you click the Finish button, it's going to use whatever report design is locked in here. All right, so that takes us through settings. The next area that we're going to take a look at under the Setup dropdown, we're actually going to go through all or most of these options here before we come back up and look at how to set up a piece of equipment. We're going to start by looking at equipment types. Again, this is something that can be entered on the piece of equipment, and it's used for reporting purposes. So you can create different groupings of equipment that you can then sort your reports by and total by. So in the sample data, we have set up a grouping for our backhoes, cranes, the bulldozers, and so on. This equipment type field can be it's alphanumeric, so it can be numbers or letters, and then the description, however you want that to show up on your reports or in your drop-down list. Okay. And that's all that's on this screen. So you enter in the type and then a description. Next, we have our standard cost codes. Now, one thing I want to point out that is different, though for those of you that have job cost, you understand what a standard cost code is, and those are all the codes that can be used on a job, including a group cost code. Equipment does not use a group. So even if you create a group in this setup, it will never be put into the transactions or into the equipment itself, because the only ones that are ever stored directly on the piece of equipment are the ones that actually have costs entered to them. That's kind of hard to understand, but again, you can create as many types of grouping, and what the sample data did is these first two characters represent a system or a group, and then the last 3 digits represent kind of whatever that cost is. So as an example here, 30-010, we're using that for brakes. And so when we buy brakes and we code that in maybe through an AP invoice, we're going to code it to the piece of equipment and then the cost code of 30-010, so that we store the cost of those brakes on the piece of equipment and we have it in the transaction file for reporting. So the first column then is the actual code that you're going to be using when you enter your costs. Then you have a description. You can enter a rate if you're going to be entering something in directly into equipment cost. It can pull this rate times a unit. If this is a cost that is coming from an AP invoice or directly from payroll, it's not going to pick this rate up. So the rate is, again, it's for cost entries directly in EQ. You can also do a formula name. And again, this is for cost entries that are entered directly in enter costs. The unit description, there's a drop down here. You can modify your unit description in custom descriptions. So this, the standard cost code or the unit description field is available there, so you can add more to this drop-down list that way. Again, this is for reporting. Memo cost. If you take a look in your handout on page 13, the majority of these are probably going to be left blank. And what that means, if you look at your document, we're saying that this entry is going to be charged for this cost code to equipment, and then the cost is going to be sent to general ledger. If you have an entry that is going to be charged to a job, so you may be recording something either through payroll or through enter costs in equipment, and you're going to enter a job number on that transaction because there's something about it that the job needs to pay for. You need to set up a separate cost code for that, and you need to check the box for memo cost so that that entry goes to GL and job cost. Okay. If it's marked and it's not charged to a job, then it only records the cost to equipment. Okay. So nothing goes to GL or job cost. So again, it depends on the type of cost this is and where it's going to be used. Like I said, probably 100% of these are going to be left with no check mark, and then you're going to come across an instance where something does need to be charged to a job. You'll come in, create a separate code for that, and you'll check the box. The cost type, the final field, Sage has defined operating and ownership. Again, this is kind of user defined. It's for reporting. You can change this list with custom descriptions. So cost type does have a drop down that is definable there. All right, our next set of codes that we need to look at are the revenue codes. You need to have at least one revenue code in order to record revenue to the piece of equipment. This is kind of the same as what we just looked at, where you will create a code, can be alphanumeric. You'll put in a description. You can put in a formula name here if you're not going to be using a table, and then a unit description. And again, these unit descriptions can be modified in custom descriptions. Okay. So you need to make a list of how you're going to charge for this piece of equipment. Sometimes you might charge it hourly. Sometimes it might be for a week. Sometimes it might be out on the job for a month, and you're going to charge the project a monthly rate. Now, if you have other types of things that you need to record for this piece of equipment that don't fit into the cost or the revenue category, we can set up what are called miscellaneous entry codes. These can be, like we have the examples here, accidents, downtime. If you're doing any PUC recording, you'll need to set up your miles for the states that you're recording and reporting. In our example here, we set up Oregon and Washington. Now, one suggestion that I would give you, you have 12 characters in this miscellaneous entry area. Instead of doing numbers, I would do alpha, because, and kind of try to abbreviate what you're putting in the description area, because it's easier for reporting to see what these are when you're doing your reports, and also in the data entry, because this entry column, when you do your list, you're not going to see this description area here. Okay, so I would just make a note of that you will probably want to do abbreviations here instead. Okay. And then give it a full description. There's a unit description here. Again, this can be modified in custom descriptions. And then the update method, as you're entering this into the system, you can either accumulate whatever, to whatever is already on that piece of equipment in the master file, or you can replace the value. So, if you're doing something maybe with meter readings, you don't want to accumulate that, you might want to replace that instead. Okay. All right, so at this point, I think we're ready to go ahead and take a look at setting up a piece of equipment. We've looked at all of the different things that we might want to set up on the piece of equipment first. We've already got those created. So now we can go up to the top and go to Set Up Equipment. And this brings us to the top of page 16. So what you want to enter here first is the equipment ID. So based on how you set the sections up, you might be entering, multiple sections or a solid ID in the equipment field. Then you'll give it a description. You'll enter out of the top. And then we have some reporting fields here that you might want to fill in, again, for some of the reports that you may be running. So things like serial number, make, model, year, the gross, let's see, I think the gross weight, tear, weight, length, width, I'm not sure where that's used for reporting, but we've got fields for that based on the types of reports, again, that you might need. The equipment type, here, if you put your cursor in that field, you can hit your list button, and it will show you the different types you've set up. So we've got it sorted right here by the description. You can actually change the view and sort it by the ID instead. We have some miscellaneous codes in here. We've changed one of the descriptions of this to be Asset Manager, and then we created a drop-down. So these three fields here can be controlled by custom descriptions. You can control the description of the field and the drop-down itself, the values on the drop-down. All right, we're going to talk about the tabs going across first, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look at the buttons going down the side. All right, so after the General tab, we have the Usage tab. The location, the job number field will be pulled anytime you code the piece of equipment to a job, whether it's in payroll or accounts payable or through enter costs. So this is an automatic update. The location field here on the side, this is a separate field that we can add to our data entry screen, and based on our EQ settings, it'll update when we post those transactions or not. Okay. Employee, if this was entered in through payroll, it'll pull in the employee number. So the last person that used this piece of equipment on this job. Last update, so whenever the last update was performed, we'll update this field. If this is a piece of equipment that is attached to another piece, so it may be a trailer and it's attached to a truck, you can put that equipment ID in here. So if you hit your list button, this just gives you the list of the pieces of equipment you've already set up. Okay. Again, for reporting purposes. The status information here at the bottom. Again, for reporting purposes, if the piece of equipment comes into the shop for maintenance, you might want to change this to out of service so that you can run reports that show which pieces of equipment might be in the shop. And then once it goes back out in the field, put it back in service. When you perform maintenance on the piece of equipment, you can record the date and the time. Now, this is not an equipment maintenance application, so you need to be aware of that. You can, excuse me, record maybe notes about the maintenance performed using your paperclip up here at the top, or use the attachments button at the bottom. But just make a note to yourself, this is not a true maintenance, equipment maintenance program. It's cost and revenue basically only. Okay. But you can record, when it came in, the date that it came in for maintenance and the time. Now we also have meter odometer reading fields. These get updated with the miscellaneous entry code. You would set one up for meter reading, and then it would actually populate these fields with a date, and then it'll update a total as well. Some users will come in and maybe put an initial in here. Just depends on if you have had to replace an odometer, or if the odometer has started itself back over. You may want to use these fields kind of in a combination to get a true picture of the true mileage. All right, configuration. This is just a text box for you to enter up to 1,000 characters, 20 lines of information about this piece of equipment, again, for reporting purposes. Maintenance, again, instead of using back here, instead of using attachments or the paperclip, you can record information in here with a date and a description. But again, this is not, please keep in mind, this is not a true maintenance program. All right, defaults. You can lock in a default revenue code for the piece of equipment, a default cost code, if it needs to go to a cost code other than what was entered on the job, maybe for that time. You can lock in a category. So if you don't lock these in, it's going to use the default in EQ settings. So this would only be to override what you have there. If you have a depreciation program, you can lock in your fixed asset ID here, again, for reporting purposes. Under miscellaneous, the component, if this is, again, if this piece of equipment is a part of another bigger or different piece of equipment, check the box that it is a component. And if you have a fuel consumption factor for this piece of equipment, you can enter it here, again, for reports. Okay, the next two tabs are totals. So we have grand totals for cost for month to date, next month, year to date, next year, life to date, and then the last time that cost was posted to this piece of equipment. We have the same for revenue. We have month to date, next month, year to date, next year, life to date, and that last update. So these are summary. Okay. Now the buttons on the side will give us the individual amounts, or the individual cost codes in our example here. Actually, let me go back. So if I want to see what cost codes or what revenue codes or miscellaneous entries have been entered on this piece of equipment, I need to click on the button. It will show me the codes that have been used, and then I need to highlight the code that I need to see information about, and I need to click on the totals button. And that will show me what the totals are for that specific cost code on that piece of equipment. Okay. So this is kind of different about how we store the totals within the piece of equipment itself, because they couldn't give you, hundreds and hundreds of fields back here. Let me get back there on this window. Okay, and we don't have separate records like we do in job costs for the cost codes. It's all stored together on the piece of equipment. And to get to those subtotals, you have to go to the separate button, highlight the cost code, and then click on the totals button. And that gives you the amounts. Now, additionally here, if you have an estimate for these cost codes and you want to be able to report how much you estimated your cost was going to be, maybe year to date, and then compare that to what you've actually spent, down here at the bottom, you can enter in estimated costs per cost code. All you have to do is add your cost codes to this grid and then click on the totals button, and you can put that information in. Now we have the same thing for revenue codes. So if you want to see how much you have earned hourly, highlight the hourly, click on the totals, and this will show you the breakdown. And again, if you have an estimate of how much you think you're going to earn on that piece of equipment, you can actually come in here and put your year-to-date or life-to-date amounts in. Okay. We have the same thing for miscellaneous entries. Now, this particular piece of equipment does not have anything entered to it. So let me see if I can find one that might. I wonder if this dozer has anything. Not sure. Nope. It's the same concept though. You would enter in or highlight the ID and then click the totals button would become activated, and you could see let me see. I don't think my documentation has it. Oh, it does. I have an example for you on page 23 in your handout. There's a dump truck there with miles and accidents. You just highlight the item and then click the totals button. Now, we have one more button to take a look at here, and this is, we take a look at kind of the start here on page 24. We have some additional information that we can store. The first one here is this license button. If you click on it, you can actually enter in your license ID, who issued it, expiration date, and a fee. And then you would use this again for reporting. So if you need to know when the licenses on your trucks are going to expire, that's what you would use this for. And then along with that, we have an additional information button here at the bottom that gives us 4 areas that we can come in and add information into. The first one is called rental. So if you are renting equipment yourself and you're going to use that on your projects, and you want to be able to track that rented equipment along with your own, you can set that equipment up in EQ, and then on this window, go ahead and check that it's rented, and then fill in date, return date, who you rented it from, how much the rental rate is. This would be the rate that you're paying to the rental company. And then you can use these fields in reports. You can condition to only show the rented equipment, and then you can run reports that show, if you're making any money renting this piece of equipment, using it on your projects or not. Okay. We have a specifications where we can add more information to this piece of equipment. Now, the fields that show up on this screen, you would actually add to it under custom fields. So let me cancel this for a second. So if I come in under File, Company Settings, Custom Fields, look at what we have here. We have Other, Ownership, Rental, Specifications. So those 4 areas that are on that button in Setup Equipment are controlled by custom fields. So if you want to add additional fields here, all you do is just highlight it, click Edit, and then you can add fields. And the same with the other buttons. So right now, let me get back in here. Under specifications, that it's blank because we don't have any custom fields set up there yet. If we go to ownership, we do have some fields already defined in custom fields. Again, this is for reporting purposes. So you can put in the date that you purchased it, what the price was, who you bought it from, their phone number, if you've had any appraisals done, again, a date, who appraised it, when you sold it, what the price was, who you sold it to, if it's financed, finance company. All of these fields, again, were defined by Sage as kind of common things that they thought that users would want to store information on that piece of equipment. But these can be modified, again, under File, Company Settings, Custom Fields. So you can add or delete some of these fields if you want to. And the same lastly under Other. Okay. They've created a field called Desired Utilization. Maybe how many hours a month do you expect that this piece of equipment is going to be used. Again, this can be modified with custom descriptions. All right, the last tab that we have here is custom fields. So these would be custom fields that have been set up on the piece of equipment, not under the buttons down here. So these are additional custom fields that you want stored at that level instead of down here under additional information. Okay. All right, so that is the setup for the piece of equipment. The next thing we're going to take a look at, we're going to take a look at our rate tables. We're going to look at revenue rates first. Because typically, you're not going to have a cost rate table. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who has a cost rate table. It's revenue rates that you're going to be setting up. The costs are going to be either labor costs, which will be the employee rate, or the cost will be on the invoice that you've received from the vendor. So under revenue rates, hold on a second here. I think my mouse just went to sleep. Just a second. There we go. Back up there. Okay. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to enter in the revenue code. So if we do a list right here, these are the codes that we created under setup revenue codes. We'll just do this in order back. So we'll go ahead and take a look at hourly. So if you take a look at page 27 in your EQ setup document, you're going to give the table a name, and we actually called ours hourly. We kind of named it to go with the code itself. And then down below, we told it the columns of criteria that this piece of equipment entry has to match in order for it to pull that particular rate. So here we said, for this table, we want it to be equipment type and job. So we check those two fields, and then if you click on table, these are the rates that we're going to pull when the type and the job match what's on this table. Okay. So again, what you're defining here under table columns is the criteria for data entry. Once I enter a piece of equipment that has a specific equipment type and it's a specific job number, this is the rate that you're going to charge. Okay. Now the example in your book, page 27, and then the top of page 28, just shows using the equipment type as the rate. The sample data goes a little farther. It adds the job number in there as well. It could even be, you might even be charging separate rates per piece of equipment. So it just depends on your company and the types of rates that you have set up as to how you're going to create this. And you'll have different, or you should have different rate tables based on the revenue codes that you have set up. So if you have some entries or pieces of equipment that are charged hourly versus some that are charged by day, you'll need a rate table for day. So revenue code for day, rate table for daily. And then again, you'll build the criteria for that. So then when you're doing your data entry and you enter this revenue code during that data entry, that transaction has to match this table. All right, the next set of tables we're going to take a look at are the account tables. And again, we set the criteria for this up in EQ settings. So we told it we were using a table, and we told it what the columns were going to be in that table. So here on this grid are the fields that we'll see. And we told it it's by piece of equipment. That was the only field that we highlighted. So that's what we see here, and then we can go ahead and pick the piece of equipment and then enter the account number, the debit account number. So let's see. Oops. We'll find an equipment. We don't have equipment in here, but we'll just go with that. Actually, this is revenue. So let me go up a little higher and find put it under here. Okay. So it just depends on, again, the account numbers that you need to be retrieved for both revenue and for cost. So again, we have an account table for the cost debit accounts, and again, we said it was by piece of equipment. So we might go here, this equipment. Okay. So this is going to override what's in EQ settings. If a piece of equipment is missing from here, then it will pick up the default account from EQ settings. All right, the last thing I want to talk about in settings are the entry grids. So when you come in under tasks, you'll see under both enter costs and enter revenues that there are two entry grids that have already been created for you. If you want to modify those, you simply come into Tools, Customize Entry, and then you pick either cost or revenue. And then you'll use your list button, and you'll pick the one that you need to modify. So let's look at what the difference is between these two. So this one is just miscellaneous cost to the piece of equipment, whereas the standard one has job cost information in it. So it depends on which one you want to use. Now, these are ones, again, created by Sage, named by Sage. If these don't make sense to you, you can recreate them and give them a different name. Okay, and then just delete these so that they no longer show up on the drop-down. So it's the same with cost versus revenue. And revenue, this can be a little confusing when you're first learning to use equipment because they called them external and internal. The difference is external means that you are recording equipment that's being that is not being used on a job, but it's out there somewhere making some money, and you want to record that, but it's not on one of your projects. Versus internal, which means it is job costed. Okay. So again, you might want to rename these or recreate them with different names so that they make more sense. So internal means you're using your own piece of equipment on your own project, where external means you're making money. You might have rented your own equipment out to another company, but you want to record that revenue that it's making. You're charging that person so much a day, a week, a month to use that piece of equipment. The difference is one has job cost fields, the other one does not. Now, if the grid is missing something and you want to put it in, all you do here is come in. This is kind of like setting up a time entry grid in payroll. You simply double click on the field. So in this, we're adding location. So, you know, in addition to the job number, we might want to put some other type of descriptive location. Okay. If you decide you don't want a field in there, you bring up the grid and you use the Erase Last button. The unfortunate thing is you can't highlight and erase. You have to go from the bottom up, erase up to where you want to get rid of it, and then you have to re-enter those fields back. It's just like doing the time entry grids in payroll. Okay, roll out of here. We're going to switch now to equipment workflow. So if you guys want to go to your equipment workflow handout, we're going to take a look at the tasks here on the drop down. And you'll see that there's just a couple here because, again, the majority of your information is going to come from outside of equipment, the interfacing modules, accounts payable, payroll, are going to feed into this module. But let's take a look at some of the data entry screens so that you can see how this would work. So miscellaneous cost, This brings up the grid where you enter the piece of equipment, the cost code. Let's just enter something in here. Maybe we have a blade, and actually, let me get a better piece of equipment that will make more sense here. Let's go with a backhoe, and we'll maybe put some brakes on it. Actually, no, let's do this. Change the view. Let's do depreciation, okay? So that's a cost on the piece of equipment that's not going to come from any other application. So this would make sense that you would potentially be entering your depreciation cost directly in equipment. Okay, let's make this up. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Equipment, code, description, date, amount. It's pre-filled the account numbers for us based on our account table and EQ settings. And then once we have that done, we'll just hit the finish button here. I'm set to an automatic post. So it's going to go ahead and post. Now, if I use that piece of equipment on a job, or I want to charge the job for whatever this cost is, I'm going to go to the standard entry grid, and I'm going to charge the job here. Let's see. Let's say we have to buy a new blade. I don't know I'm just making this up here. They broke something. Something happened on the job site that was not our fault. It was the owner of the project that needs to incur this cost. So I'm going to charge this directly to the job. Why didn't we go into the cost cut? Hold on. Oh, I know why. We didn't set up a code for that. So let's cancel out of here. We need to come in here under Setup Standard Cost Codes, and we need to create something here. So let's go 91999, and let's call this job charge. We're not going to put a rate, and we're not going to put any kind of a unit description here. And we're going to check this memo cost button checkbox here. That tells it that we can charge this to the job. So we'll okay that. Let's come back here under tasks, costs, standard. Let's grab our blade. And this time let's go down and grab job charge. There it is. Okay. And let's say broke. Whoop. Put our job number in. Now we can enter a cost code that this is going to be coded to over in job cost. Maybe, yep. And let's just stick it under equipment. Yeah, we'll stick it under that. And it's going to cost us, I don't know, $1,000 to fix this thing. Okay, and it's retrieving our debit account and our credit account based on our EQ settings and our account tables. Right. Now, when I hit finish here, this is going to post not only to general ledger and to job cost. So this cost, we're not actually paying for this. The job is paying for this. So let's go ahead and hit finish here. And let's go take a look. probably going to prove me wrong here. Let's go to the blade. Let's take a look at our cost codes. Oop, there it is. I could be wrong. Yep. So it actually did post to the piece of equipment. But it also posted to the job itself. And to general ledger. So if you get in a situation like that where you have a cost that needs to go to the job and your cursor is not going into the cost code field, that means you need to set up a special cost code for that, marked as a memo cost. All right, revenue. Okay, so we used a backhoe on, let's see, we'll just call this revenue. We used a backhoe on a job. And again, we need to, because this is going to be revenue to the piece of equipment, but it's going to be cost to the job. So we need to give it a cost code. Now the category is going to come from either the piece of equipment or EQ settings. Maybe we used it out there for 8 hours. We don't have a rate table set up for this. I'll pull this out. So instead of keying this in, let's go ahead and change. Let's make some changes here so that you can see how this works. I'm going to come back in here. Actually, let's go to the rate tables, revenue rates. We're going to call this hourly 2. And we're going to call this hourly by EQ. And we're going to create this table based on the piece of equipment. And I'm going to go ahead and put our code in here. And we're going to charge this at $75 an hour. And we'll okay that. All right, so now let's go back, enter our revenue in, and let's pull this out here so we can see it. Okay, so let's get our backhoe. Put our stuff in. We need to grab the cost code for this. Counting date, put in the hours, and there's our rate. It popped in with the $75 an hour that we put in on our rate table. So you can have, per revenue code, you can have multiple rate tables. So you saw here under setup, rate tables, under revenue code 1, I have 2. I have hourly, and then I have hourly by EQ. So it searched both tables to come up with the rate, and it picked the higher of the 2, which is what I told it to do in EQ settings. Now, typically, you're going to be doing this revenue entry. If you have payroll, you'll be doing it through payroll because you'll be getting this information off the time cards that you're entering in. And so let's switch over to payroll for a second. Let me save this and finish. And let's switch over to payroll. Okay. Once you have equipment up and running, you want to be sure here under PR settings that you've got your interface turned on to equipment. And I'm going to actually switch this all over. This should all be automatic. Okay. And then under the EQ entry settings, you need to tell it what you want to send over to equipment. It's going to default to go by total summary by piece of equipment and cost code. If you want to see the employee detail, you need to check this box. The other thing is, if you want the cost code from the time record to be used as the cost code on the cost entries, on the revenue entries, check this box as well. So it pre-fills that information for you. Then the other thing you need to make sure of is under Customized Time Entry, under Tools, make sure that you have one of your time entry grids that can handle equipment. Now there is one that comes with the software called Equipment View. And what you want to make sure of is not only do you have equipment on the main grid so that you can record costs. So if an employee works on a piece of equipment, you can enter that equipment number and that equipment cost code. But also, if that piece of equipment is used on a job, you want to make sure you have something filled in here under EQ Detail. You need to be able to see on that screen the piece of equipment, the job information is right, that it's pulled the right revenue code, and that you see the units rate and amount. So you can use this equipment time view as a guide if you're setting up your own. So let's take a look at what that looks like if we enter time here in payroll. I'm going to change my view here to equipment. Right. And let me just make this bigger so you can see the whole thing here. All right, so if I am keying in someone who is working on a piece of equipment, I can put the equipment code in. Maybe they worked on the backhoe, and maybe what they did was change the brakes. Okay, I can leave the job number blank because this is not being charged to a job. This person maybe works in the shop and they're working on that piece of equipment, and I need to charge labor cost for that work to that piece of equipment. So here I can, maybe he worked on it for 8 hours. Okay. And then maybe the next person, he worked on or used, a different piece of equipment on a job. So I'm putting in this piece of equipment, no equipment cost code, because this is actually revenue. And then I'm going to put the job number in. I'm going to go ahead and put in the cost code for it. And I'm going to put in the hours that he used. And then I'm going to click down below here. You see this button called EQ Detail. This is for revenue. And you see what it's pulled in for me because I told it. And unfortunately, this grid does not expand here. But I told it to grab the cost code. It pulled the category from equipment. It pulled the default revenue code. It pulled the units from the previous screen. But it didn't, oh, I know why. Because I didn't have him set up on the table. Well, okay, so let's cancel this and close this window and cancel that line. And let's put the same guy in here with the same piece of equipment. Okay, now we go to EQ Detail. Again, it's pulled the job, equipment, the job, the cost code, the category, the revenue code. Oh, darn it. Oh. Let me go across there, enter, enter. There's my rate. Okay, So be sure when you get to this window that you review the values. Make sure that information is coming across from the previous window, and enter through that line to get the rate to pull in. So now I've got cost and I've got revenue, and I've entered this directly through payroll. So this is what I mean when I'm saying that the majority of your information may not be entered through equipment itself. It may be entered either in payroll, or you've got an invoice that you're entering in through accounts payable that is being coded. Right. Miscellaneous entry. We've again set up something under Customize Entry, Miscellaneous. And if we do a list here, we've got one where we're recording meter information. Looks like they wanted to track diesel and accidents. So this is what I was talking about when you set up your miscellaneous entry items, that you use an abbreviation or kind of spell it out, because if this came up as numbers, you would have no idea what those things meant to create this entry grid. Okay, so here under weekly, so here you would just enter your piece of equipment. And then here, if we wanted to track meters or diesels or accidents, they've actually combined three values on the same miscellaneous entry grid. So this grid is again, it's optional. It's something that you want to track in addition to cost and revenue, and you want to be able to do it on a grid type of entry, instead of setting up a custom field and having to go to each piece of equipment and go to that custom field. Right, the import. It's just one screen. You need to give it the import file and then a reject records file name. This is going to import the information into the new.eqt file. So you have to actually manually post that once you do the import. There are help screens. If you come in under help, and if you go to index and you type in import, it will show you what the layouts need to look like. So you have a cost layout, you have a revenue layout, and a miscellaneous layout. So just double click on it to open it up, and it shows you what the columns are. You can actually print those out so that you can create, if this information is coming off of a spreadsheet, you can make sure your spreadsheet has the correct information in the correct order. And it's the same for each one of these. So if I'm looking for revenue, just double click and open up that screen, and then print that out, so you have a copy of what that file needs to look like. Right, there is a post routine here. So again, this is like any other application. If you have rejected entries, maybe you've got something that goes beyond the next month. Remember, you can post 1 month into the future. You'll have to come back, once you close the month, you'll have to come back and run post manually. Additionally, if you've imported anything, you have to run post manually. Then lastly, we have close month. Again, you're closing month to month forever, no close year. So this is going to roll the next month fields into this month and this month into last month. It'll update it'll zero out year to date. If you're at the end of a year, it rolls that into last year. And then zeroes out year to date. And then close week, if you've turned on the extra field. So over here under EQ settings, okay. This is set like this, okay. And actually, I turned that off, but it didn't recognize it, but that's what the close week is for, right here. Okay, so that is equipment setup and workflow. Oops. All right, so do we have any questions? So Tina, are you there? Were there any questions in the chat area?
Yeah, I'm here. There are no questions, though, not at this point.
Okay, well, let's give them a minute or two. If anybody wants to, ask us any questions while we're here, I'll be happy to answer those. Also, if you think of anything later and you want to forward those to Tina, she'll let me know, and I will be happy to respond to that.
Sounds good. I don't see any questions coming through, so I think we're pretty good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll have another session on a new topic coming up in just a couple of weeks, and so I hope to see you there. Thanks everybody.